church smelled like a garden of roses, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of my own shattered dreams. I stood perfectly still at the end of the long, white-carpeted aisle, wearing a beautiful, simple white dress that had taken me 2 full years of careful saving to afford. I remember feeling like the luckiest woman in the world, my heart swelling with pure love and dizzy excitement for the future we were about to start together. The elderly priest, Father Reginald, smiled warmly at the packed pews and asked the timeless, solemn question we had all been waiting for. If anyone here present knows of any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined in holy matrimony, you must speak now or forever hold your peace. I held my breath, expecting the traditional, respectful silence that would signal the final step before our vows. Instead, my fiancé Paulson cleared his throat loudly. My eyes, wide with confusion, snapped to his face. "I do," he announced, his voice cold, clear, and shockingly firm. He turned his body fully to face me, and the look in his eyes was not one of love, but of pure, chilling ice. "I'm sorry, Amelia, but I simply cannot do this," he stated, his tone flat and final. "I will not spend the rest of my life shackled to your poverty. Let's be brutally honest with each other. You have absolutely nothing to offer me." He slowly twisted the expensive platinum wedding band from his finger and let it drop carelessly to the stone floor. The sharp, metallic clink echoed like a gunshot through the dead, stunned silence of the chapel. Then, without a single backward glance, he turned on his heel and walked calmly back down the aisle, leaving me utterly and completely alone in front of everyone we had ever known and loved. The humiliation was a physical, burning pain, a scalding wave that washed over me from my head down to my trembling toes. If a moment of devastating public betrayal like this has ever happened to you, please tell me where you're listening from. Because the story of what happened next, the incredible revenge that followed, will truly and utterly blow your mind. For a long, terrifying moment, I was completely numb, frozen solid in place at the ornate wooden altar. I couldn't move my limbs, couldn't draw a full breath, and couldn't even summon the tears that were burning behind my eyes. The beautiful centuries-old church, with its magnificent, colorful stained glass windows, now felt like a cold, inescapable prison. My dear sister Sarah finally rushed up from the front pew, her own face pale with shock, and she had to physically pry my stiff fingers from the bouquet of white lilies I was clutching and lead me away, her arm a tight, supportive band around my violently shaking shoulders. As we walked back down the same aisle I had just happily and hopefully floated down minutes before, I heard the horrified, sharp whispers erupting from the guests on both sides. "I just cannot believe he actually did that to her," one woman gasped, and another murmured, "Oh, that poor, poor girl." Their overwhelming pity felt almost worse than outright anger would have. I saw my sweet mother sobbing openly into her lace handkerchief, and my father's face was a frightening shade of crimson, his big, kind hands clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists, as if he wanted to punch the nearest stone pillar. But the absolute worst sight, the one that truly broke what was left of my spirit, was seeing Paulson's parents sitting calmly in their pew. They didn't look shocked or appalled. They just looked deeply, terribly smug. They had never, ever believed that a public school teacher's modest salary was good enough for their brilliant, business-savvy, ambitious son. I guess, in the most brutal way possible, they had finally been proven right. In the small, frantically decorated dressing room at the back of the church, my sister helped me with trembling hands out of the intricate wedding dress. The delicate lace and hand-sewn beads I had loved so much just an hour ago now felt cheap, foolish, and unbearably heavy. I pulled on a simple, floral sundress I had packed for our romantic Hawaiian honeymoon, a magical trip that was now never ever going to happen. The crushing, awful reality of it all finally began to sink in, a heavy, cold stone of despair settling deep in my stomach. My whole life, the entire future I had so carefully and lovingly planned, was obliterated in one single, cruel, and very public sentence. The church parking lot was blindingly bright and swelteringly hot, a stark contrast to the cool, dim silence I had just escaped. I leaned heavily against the familiar, slightly rusted door of my old, dependable sedan, the summer sun warm on my bare arms but doing absolutely nothing to melt the thick layer of ice that had formed deep within my veins. I kept replaying his awful, cutting words over and over again in my head, a torturous, broken record. Shackled to your poverty. You have absolutely nothing to offer me. Each phrase felt like a separate, sharp knife twisting in my heart. What did my career as a dedicated fifth-grade teacher, a career I was genuinely passionate about, truly matter in his world of high finance and luxury cars? I had given him all of my love, my unwavering support through his late nights at the office, and my complete trusting heart. I had believed him when he said my kindness was worth more than any stock portfolio. Now I saw that had all been a beautiful, convenient lie. The cold, hard truth of his character bit at my soul as I made a silent, solemn vow to myself, a vow that would ultimately change the entire course of my life. I was not going to be his pathetic, discarded ex-fiancé. I was not going to spend the rest of my days crying over a man who saw people as financial transactions. I unlocked my car with a determined click and slid into the driver's seat, staring blankly at the dusty dashboard. The wedding reception, with its uneaten cake and a band now playing for no one, was someone else's problem. My new life, my real life, was starting right here, right now, in this very moment of profound, soul-crushing pain. A week after the disastrous non-wedding, I was back in my small rented apartment, surrounded by the sad, physical reminders of my relationship. A framed photo of us smiling on a beach sat on the coffee table, and I couldn't even bring myself to look at it. My phone, which had been buzzing constantly with concerned messages from friends and family, finally lit up with a different kind of notification. It was an email from a law firm I had never heard of, Franklin & Associates. The subject line was stark and official: inheritance regarding the estate of Eleanor Shaw. My heart skipped a confused beat. Eleanor Shaw was my great-aunt, a reclusive, somewhat eccentric woman I had met only a handful of times in my life. She had always been kind to me during our brief visits, asking thoughtful questions about my teaching, but we were by no means close. With trembling fingers, I opened the email. It stated that Aunt Eleanor had passed away peacefully in her sleep, and to my complete and utter astonishment, she had named me as the sole beneficiary in her will. The estate, the email coolly explained, was not a simple cash inheritance. It was a property. A small, struggling independent bookstore named The Quiet Page, located in a sleepy, forgotten part of the city. The lawyer's note mentioned that the business was underperforming, but had potential value in its real estate. My mind raced. This wasn't a life-changing fortune, not even close. It was a problem, a dusty, failing bookstore. But in that moment, sitting in my grief, it was also something else. It was a tangible thing. It was mine. And for the first time since Paulson had walked away, I felt a tiny, fragile flicker of something other than despair. It felt like a sign, a bizarre and unexpected door cracking open in a wall I thought was solid. The following Saturday, I drove across town to the address listed in the lawyer's email. The neighborhood was a world away from the sleek glass and steel part of the city where Paulson worked. The buildings here were older, a little worn around the edges, but they had character. I found the bookstore tucked between a laundromat and a small grocery store. A faded, hand-painted sign swung gently in the breeze, reading, "The Quiet Page." Using the heavy, that old-fashioned key the lawyer had mailed to me, I unlocked the front door. A little bell jingled overhead as I stepped inside, and the smell hit me immediately. A wonderful, comforting mix of old paper, binding glue, and faint, sweet vanilla. The shop was dim, lit only by the dusty sunlight filtering through the large front window. It was, as described, struggling. Books were stacked in slightly haphazard piles on wooden tables, and a fine layer of dust coated everything. But as I walked slowly down the narrow aisles, running my fingers over the spines of classic novels and obscure poetry collections, I didn't feel disappointment. I felt a strange, profound connection. This was a place of stories, of knowledge, of quiet escape. It was the complete opposite of Paulson's loud, money-obsessed world. In the back room, I found a small, oak desk. In the top drawer, beneath a stack of old receipts, was a leather-bound journal. I opened it, It was my great-aunt's handwriting, filled with her musings on books, customers, and surprisingly, shrewd little notes on business. One underlined sentence on the first page made my breath catch. True value is never obvious. It is always hidden, waiting for the right eyes to see it. I sat down in the creaky wooden chair, the journal in my lap, and looked around at the quiet, dusty shop. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a test, and I was suddenly determined to pass it. Sitting at my kitchen table that evening, I spread out the bookstore's financial records. The numbers were, as the lawyer had warned, bleak. The rent was barely being covered by the meager sales. It was clear the shop had been running on my aunt's passion, not profit. My first instinct was to follow the lawyer's subtle hint, sell the property, take whatever money I could get, and try to move on with my life. It was the sensible, logical thing to do. But then I thought of Paulson's words. You have nothing to offer. I thought of the quiet peace I had felt surrounded by all those books. I thought of my aunt's journal, filled with her belief in hidden value. A fierce, stubborn determination ignited inside me. I would not take the easy way out. I decided right then that I would not sell. Instead, I would try to save it. I had a small amount of my own savings left, the money I had been putting aside for our wedding and honeymoon. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a seed. I pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write down every idea I had. I would clean the store from top to bottom. I would use my teacher's knowledge to start a children's story hour on weekends to bring in families. I would look for rare or first edition books hidden in the stock that could be sold online for a higher price. It was a huge, terrifying risk. I could lose all my savings and end up with nothing. But for the first time since the wedding, I felt a purpose. I was no longer Amelia, the jilted bride. I was Amelia, the new owner of the quiet page, and I was going to fight for it. The next few months were a whirlwind of exhausting, exhilarating work. I spent every afternoon after school and all day on weekends at the bookstore. I cleaned until my arms ached, dusting every shelf and polishing the old wooden floor until it gleamed under the new, but warmer light bulbs I had installed. I sorted through thousands of books, learning to identify which ones were just common paperbacks and which were hidden treasures. I found a first edition of a famous novel tucked away in a box in the basement, and I sold it online for more money than the shop had made in the previous 3 months. It was proof. Proof that my aunt's belief in hidden value was real. I started the weekend story hour, using my best, most animated teacher's voice to read to a handful of wide-eyed children. Their parents would browse the shelves and often leave with a stack of books. Slowly, very slowly, the sales figures began to creep upward. The shop was still not making a real profit, but it was no longer actively dying. It was coming back to life. And so was I. The all-consuming work was a healing balm for my heartache. I was too tired at the end of each day to lie in bed and cry over Paulson. I was building something that was entirely my own. One evening, as I was arranging a new display, an older gentleman with kind eyes and a sharp, intelligent face came in. He introduced himself as Mr. Alden, a retired book publisher and a former customer and friend of my aunt. He looked around the revitalized shop with a warm, approving smile. "Eleanor would be so very pleased," he said softly. That simple compliment meant more to me than any praise I had ever received in my life. One rainy Tuesday evening, while I was working on the shop's new website, a notification popped up on my laptop. It was a social media update from a mutual friend. It was a photo of Paulson, looking tanned and successful, standing with a group of people in sharp business suits at a glamorous rooftop party. The caption read, "Celebrating Paulson's new interview at Satire Holdings. Go get 'em." My stomach twisted into a familiar, painful knot. Satire Holdings was one of the most prestigious multinational corporations in the city. It was the kind of place he had always dreamed of working, the pinnacle of his career ambitions. I felt a cold wave of insecurity wash over me. There he was, living his best life, climbing the corporate ladder, while I was covered in dust, counting pennies in a used bookstore. The old, painful feelings of not being good enough threatened to rise up and swallow me whole. I was about to close the laptop and retreat into my sadness when I stopped myself. I looked around my shop. I saw the clean, organized shelves. I remembered the joyful faces of the children during story hour. I thought of the first edition book I had discovered and sold. I was building something real, something with my own two hands and my own mind. Paulson was just chasing a title and a corner office that someone else could just as easily take away from him. The knot in my stomach began to loosen, replaced by a new, steady calm. Let him have his interview. Let him have his fancy parties. My path was different, and for the first time, I started to believe it might actually be better. Mr. Alden, the retired publisher, started visiting the shop more frequently. He would often stay for an hour, sipping the tea I offered him and sharing incredible stories about the publishing world. He was a wealth of knowledge, and I hung on his every word. One afternoon, he was looking over my simple accounting books, his sharp eyes scanning the numbers. "You have a good head for this, Amelia," he repulsed, pointing to a column where I had tracked the profit from online rare book sales. "You're seeing opportunities others miss. That's the Paulson of a true business person." His praise made me blush with pride. He began to teach me, acting as an informal mentor. He explained concepts like asset valuation, Paulsonet niches, and long-term growth strategy. He didn't see my bookstore as a cute little hobby. He saw it as a potential business. "This shop is your foundation," he told me one day, tapping his finger on the counter for emphasis. "But don't let it be your ceiling. You can build on this. You can acquire other small, undervalued businesses, just like you acquired that first edition book. Find things with hidden value, improve them, and make them thrive." His words opened up a whole new world of possibility in my mind. I wasn't just a bookseller. I was a potential entrepreneur. I started reading business books from my own shelves, studying the stories of people who had started with very little and built something great. I was no longer just healing, I was preparing. A year flew by, in a blur of hard work and quiet learning. The quiet page was now consistently profitable, a cozy, beloved fixture in the neighborhood. Using the profits and the knowledge I had gained, I took my first small, cautious step beyond the bookstore. Following Mr. Alden's advice, I used my growing understanding of online sales to acquire a tiny, struggling e-commerce business that sold specialty artisanal teas. It was a perfect fit. My bookstore customers often enjoyed a good cup of tea. I improved the website, streamlined the packaging, and Paulsoneted it to a niche audience. Within 6 months, the little tea company was also turning a profit. I repeated the process with a small, local graphic design studio that was talented but had poor Paulsonetting. I didn't just throw money at these businesses. I used my skills to identify their specific problems and fix them. I created a small, quiet conglomerate of my own, which I officially named Veritas Holdings, a nod to the truth I had found in my own capabilities after living in Paulson's shadow for so long. I worked tirelessly, often late into the night, but the work felt empowering, not draining. I was building an empire, one small, thoughtful acquisition at a time. I was so focused on my own growth that I barely had time to think about my old life. The pain of the wedding day was now a distant, faded memory, a scar instead of an open wound. One quiet afternoon, Mr. Alden came into the bookstore, his expression more serious than usual. He held a folded financial newspaper under his arm. "I thought you might find this interesting, Amelia," he said, spreading the paper out on the counter. He pointed to a small article in the business section. The headline read, "Satire Holdings faces hostile takeover bid, stock plummets." My eyes scanned the article quickly. It detailed how Satire, the company Paulson was so desperate to work for, had made a series of bad investments and was now dangerously overleveraged. A larger rival corporation was circling, preparing to buy it out for a fraction of its former value. The company was in chaos, and jobs were on the line. I looked up at Mr. Alden, my heart beating a little faster. He gave me a small, knowing smile. "An asset is only valuable if it's priced correctly," he said quietly, repeating a lesson he had taught me months ago. "Right now, Satire Holdings is the most undervalued asset in this city. Its stock price is in the gutter. The Paulsonet is panicking." He let the words hang in the air between us. The implication was staggering, audacious. He wasn't just suggesting I watch from the sidelines. He was suggesting I get in the game. The company that represented everything Paulson wanted, the prestige, the power, the wealth, was crumbling. And I, the woman he had called poor, was in a position to do something about it. The student was ready, and the ultimate test had just arrived. The following weeks were a tense, thrilling whirlwind of high-stakes activity. With Mr. Alden's guidance and the solid financial foundation I had built with Veritas Holdings, I moved with precision and confidence. We conducted a deep analysis of Satire's finances, confirming it was a fundamentally sound company that had been crippled by terrible short-term management. Its core assets and client list were still incredibly valuable. While other investors were fleeing in panic, we started quietly acquiring large blocks of its plummeting stock. Every dollar I had earned, every profit from the bookstore, the tea company, and the design studio was strategically deployed. I wasn't being reckless. I was being ruthlessly logical, just as I had been when finding valuable books in a dusty pile. I saw the hidden value everyone else was too scared or too short-sighted to see. The day finally came when the lawyers informed me that Veritas Holdings had acquired a controlling interest in Satire Holdings. The paperwork was signed. The transfer of ownership was complete. I was no longer just Amelia, the bookstore owner. I was the majority owner of a multinational corporation. I sat in my small office above the quiet page, the formal documents laid out before me, and allowed myself a single quiet, triumphant tear. This wasn't just about money or power. It was about validation. It was about proving to myself, most of all, that my value was never determined by someone else's shallow appraisal. The quiet, strategic revenge I had never even consciously planned was now a reality. The email went out to every single employee of Satire Holdings on a Monday morning. It was from the new ownership group, Veritas Holdings, and it announced a mandatory all-hands meeting for the entire company at 10 a.m. in the main headquarters auditorium. The subject line was simple: New Company Direction. I can only imagine the fear and anxiety that must have spread through those sleek modern offices. People were terrified of layoffs, of drastic changes, of the unknown. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple, elegant, and powerful navy blue pantsuit. I looked like a CEO, but I felt like myself, just a wiser, stronger version. I arrived at the towering Satire building, a place I had only ever seen from the outside. I walked through the gleaming lobby, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, and rode the elevator up to the auditorium. I stood backstage, listening to the nervous hum of hundreds of employees gathering. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I knew Paulson was out there in that crowd, probably just as anxious as everyone else, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned completely upside down. The head of HR, a nervous-looking man I had briefly met with, stepped onto the stage to introduce the new owner. Good morning. Thank you all for gathering on such short notice. It is my great privilege to introduce the new majority shareholder and owner of Satire Holdings. He paused for effect. The stage lights dimmed slightly and a single spotlight clicked on. I took a deep, calming breath and walked out onto the stage. The stage lights were bright and hot, and for a second, I was blinded. The huge auditorium was packed. I could feel the weight of hundreds of curious, worried eyes on me. As my vision adjusted, I walked calmly to the center of the stage and stood at the polished wooden podium. I looked out at the sea of faces, and it didn't take me long to find him. Paulson was sitting in the third row, wearing his best suit, ready to impress the new boss. His eyes met mine. I saw the initial flicker of confusion, then disbelief, and then, as the reality of the situation crashed down upon him, a slow, dawning horror that drained all the color from his face. His mouth actually fell slightly open. I gave him a small, cool, professional smile, the kind you give a stranger, and then I turned my gaze to address the entire room. Good morning, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the microphone. My name is Amelia Moss. I am the founder and CEO of Veritas Holdings, and as of 9 a.m. this morning, I am the new owner of Satire Holdings. I paused, letting the gravity of that statement settle over the room. I could see the shock ripple through the crowd. I was not the elderly, gray-haired tycoon they had been expecting. I believe in many things, I continued. I believe in transparency. I believe in fair compensation for hard work. And I believe that the true value of a company lies not in its stock price, but in its people. I spoke about my vision for the company's future, about fostering innovation and integrity. And then, I delivered the line I had been carefully preparing. "I have learned many valuable lessons on my journey to this stage today," I said, my eyes scanning the audience and briefly, very briefly, resting on Paulson's pale, stunned face. One of the most important was this: in business and in life, you must learn to distinguish between true assets and mere liabilities. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. The room was utterly silent. For too long, this company has been held back by liabilities, by poor decision-making, by short-sighted strategies, and by a culture that sometimes valued appearances over actual substance. I could see the senior managers in the front row shifting uncomfortably in their seats. That era ends now. Effective immediately, we will be conducting a thorough review of all departments and leadership roles. My goal is not to tear this company down, but to build it back up, stronger and more sustainable than ever before. We will be identifying the true assets within these walls, the innovative thinkers, the hard workers, the loyal team players, and we will be empowering them. I concluded my speech by announcing a company-wide audit of all salaries to ensure fair pay and a new initiative for employee development. The applause that followed was initially hesitant, then grew into a genuine, hopeful roar. As I stepped away from the podium, I knew that the message had been received. The old way of doing things was over. And Paulson, who had built his career on style over substance, was now a glaring liability in my new company. The rest of that day was a surreal blur of meetings and introductions. I was escorted from the auditorium to the executive floor to the corner office that now belonged to me. It was a massive, beautiful space with a breathtaking panoramic view of the city. It was everything Paulson had ever wanted. As I sat behind the immense, empty desk, my new assistant informed me that a Mr. Paulson Reynolds was requesting a moment of my time. He had been waiting outside for over an hour. A small, cold smile touched my lips. I had been expecting this. "Send him in," I said calmly. The door opened and Paulson walked in. He looked a wreck. His confident swagger was gone, replaced by a nervous, almost shuffling gait. His face was still pale, and he couldn't quite meet my eyes. "Amelia," he began, his voice strained. Miss Moss, I don't even know what to say. I am so incredibly sorry." He started to ramble, offering weak excuses about being young and foolish, about the pressure from his family, about how he never meant to hurt me so deeply. He was begging, not for a second chance at a relationship, but for a second chance at his career. He was trying to appeal to our past connection. I let him talk until he ran out of words and stood there in miserable, awkward silence. I stood up from the desk and walked over to the large window, looking out at the city I now had a significant stake in. I let the silence stretch, making the room feel even larger and him feel even smaller. Finally, I turned to face him. "The past is not a connection, Paulson," I said, my voice even and devoid of anger. "It is simply a lesson, and I learned mine very, very well." I walked back to my desk and pressed a button on the intercom. "Sarah, could you please escort Mr. Reynolds out? His personal effects have already been boxed and will be sent to him. His position has been eliminated." I looked at him one last time. The man who had once held my entire future in his hands and had thrown it away now looked utterly broken. There was no yelling, no screaming, no dramatic scene. There was just the quiet, absolute finality of a business decision. "The security escort will see you out," I said, my tone as flat and cold as his had been in the church. I then turned my attention to the computer screen on my desk, effectively dismissing him from my office and my life as one would dismiss a minor, irrelevant clerical error. He stood there for a second longer, stunned into immobility, before my assistant and a security guard gently guided him out of the room. The door clicked shut, and the only sound was the quiet hum of the city below me. Later that week, I officially stepped into my role as the active CEO of Satire Holdings. My first official act was to gather the remaining senior leadership team. I laid out my vision clearly. We would honor all existing client contracts, but we would be restructuring the company from the ground up, focusing on ethical business practices, long-term growth, and employee well-being. I announced the immediate dissolution of the old, cutthroat performance review system that had encouraged managers like Paulson to exploit their staff. In its place, we implemented a new, transparent system based on collaborative goals, innovation, and mentorship. I also announced a profit-sharing program for all employees, ensuring that everyone would benefit from the company's future success. The news was met with a wave of relief and genuine excitement. The morale in the building, which had been at an all-time low, began to lift almost immediately. People stopped looking at their feet in the hallway and started making eye contact, their expressions hopeful. I was not a distant, fearsome owner. I was a present, engaged leader who ate lunch in the cafeteria and remembered people's names. I was building the kind of company I would have been proud to work for. A company where value was measured in integrity and results, not in ruthless ambition. A month after the takeover, I was working late in my new office when Mr. Alden stopped by for a visit. He looked around the spacious room with a twinkle in his eye. "I have to admit, Amelia," he said, a warm smile spreading across his face, "even I could not have predicted a turnaround of this magnitude. You have exceeded my wildest expectations. How does it feel?" I gestured for him to sit in one of the plush chairs facing my desk. "It feels right," I said, honestly. "It doesn't feel like revenge anymore, not really. It feels like justice. It feels like this is exactly where I was always meant to be, doing exactly what I was always meant to do." He nodded, understanding completely. "Revenge is a shallow motive, but it can be a powerful catalyst," he said wisely. "You, however, used that energy to build something real and lasting. You didn't just tear him down, you built yourself up, and in the process, you're saving hundreds of jobs and rebuilding an entire company. That is true success." His words cemented the feeling that had been growing in my heart. This was never about Paulson, it was about me. It was about discovering my own strength, my own intelligence, and my own incredible capacity for growth. The victory was so much sweeter because it was built on a foundation of my own hard work and principles, not on spite. 6 months later, Satire Holdings was a completely transformed company. We had secured new, stable long-term contracts, our stock price had recovered and then surpassed its previous high, and we had been featured in business magazines as a phoenix rising from the ashes. I was invited to speak at a major business leadership conference. The auditorium was filled with hundreds of aspiring entrepreneurs and established executives. When it was my turn to speak, I walked onto the stage, not as a victim, but as a leader. I told my story. I didn't mention Paulson by name, but I spoke about the moment my life fell apart and the unexpected inheritance that became my salvation. I talked about the importance of seeing hidden value in both businesses and in people. I spoke about the power of resilience, of continuous learning, and of leading with integrity instead of ego. "Don't let anyone else ever define your worth," I told the captivated audience, my voice strong and clear. "Your value is not determined by your salary, your job title, or the opinion of someone who doesn't see your potential. Your value is inherent. It is your intelligence, your work ethic, your kindness, and your ability to get back up every time life knocks you down. Nurture it. Believe in it. And then go out and build your own empire, not for anyone else, but for yourself." The applause was thunderous. As I left the stage, I knew that my journey, which had started in the ashes of heartbreak, had finally reached its true and satisfying destination. After the conference, my inbox flooded with messages from people inspired by my story. But one email stood out. It was from a young woman named Clara, a former junior analyst at Satire, who had been fired by Paulson for not being committed enough after she refused to work unpaid overtime. She described how that termination had devastated her confidence and career prospects. Reading her words, I saw a reflection of my own pain. I immediately had my assistant find her contact information and called her personally. We spoke for nearly an hour. I heard the familiar tremor of self-doubt in her voice, the same one I had carried for so long. Before we hung up, I offered her a new position at Satire, heading a new department I was creating focused on ethical business practices. Her tearful gratitude wasn't just about the job, it was about validation. It was the first of many such calls I would make. I realized my responsibility extended beyond just running a profitable company. I had a duty to fix the broken systems Paulson and others like him had created, one redeemed career at a time. With Clara now on board, we launched a full internal review of all past management decisions. We discovered a pattern of systemic issues. departments where overtime was consistently underreported, promotions given based on favoritism rather than merit, and a culture of fear that stifled innovation. We established a confidential ethics hotline and guaranteed no retaliation for whistleblowers. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of employees came forward with stories and evidence. With each testimony, the full picture of Paulson's toxic leadership became clearer. It was more than just my personal humiliation. It was a widespread pattern of abuse of power. We compiled the evidence meticulously. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about accountability and creating a permanent positive change in the company's culture. We were surgically removing the rot to allow healthy growth, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what Clara or I had experienced. The board of directors, initially nervous about my takeover, was now fully supportive. The company's financial recovery was undeniable, and the surge in employee morale had directly boosted productivity and innovation. At our quarterly meeting, I presented the findings from our internal ethics review. I showed them the data linking the old, toxic management style to high employee turnover and lost clients. Then, I presented the new policies we had implemented and the positive metrics that were already emerging. The board unanimously approved my proposal to make the ethics committee a permanent, powerful fixture within the company's structure. They also approved substantial budget increases for employee development and wellness programs. Leaving that meeting, I felt a deep, profound sense of accomplishment. I hadn't just taken over a company, I had healed it. I had transformed it from a place of fear into a place of purpose. The victory felt clean and complete. The year to the day after I walked onto the stage at Satire, I was back at the quiet page. The little bell above the door jingled its familiar welcome. The smell of old books and vanilla was a comforting embrace. Mr. Alden was there, sitting in his usual armchair, reading. He looked up and smiled. "The CEO returns to her roots," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I laughed, running my hand along a shelf of classic novels. "This will always be my first real success," I said. "This is where I learned to believe in myself again." I told him about Clara and the ethics committee, about the board meeting, about the company's renewed spirit. He listened, nodding slowly. "You've done more than get revenge, Amelia," he said. "You've created a legacy. You took the worst moment of your life and used it to build something that makes life better for hundreds of people. That is a success story that truly matters." His words settled in my heart, filling me with a quiet, enduring peace. He was right. This was never about Paulson. It was about my journey and the incredible places it had led me. My phone buzzed with a news alert later that week. The article was about the struggling restaurant chain Paulson had tried to start after leaving Satire. It had failed, spectacularly. The review painted a picture of poor management, unpaid vendors, and a concept that was all flash and no substance. There was a quote from a former investor: "He talked a big game, but there was never any real plan. It was all ego." I felt a flicker of pity, but no satisfaction. His failure was his own doing, a direct result of his character. His path, built on arrogance and the devaluation of others, had led to a dead end. Mine, built on hard work, resilience, and a genuine belief in hidden value, had led me here. I didn't feel like I had won and he had lost. We were simply living the lives we had built for ourselves, with the consequences of our own choices. I closed the news article and didn't think about it again. His story was irrelevant to mine now. Today, I split my time between the Satire headquarters and my quiet office above the bookstore. Both bring me joy for different reasons. One is a testament to scale and impact, the other to soul and personal passion. Sometimes I look out my high-rise window at the city sprawling below and think about that heartbroken woman in the wedding dress. I wish I could tell her that the pain was not the end of her story, but the brutal, necessary beginning. I would tell her that her value was never in someone else's ring or approval, but in her own intelligent mind and resilient spirit. The journey taught me that the most powerful revenge is not schadenfreude, but sublime, unshakable success. It is a life lived so fully and so well that the past loses all its power to hurt you. It is building your own kingdom, on your own terms, with a foundation of integrity that no one can ever tear down. And that is a kingdom that lasts forever.